My name is Michael Waddington. I am a trial lawyer with 2 decades of experience. Today we're going to talk about cross-examining a covert narcissist. Now, a covert narcissist is someone that has narcissistic personality disorder, and this type of person has some very interesting quirks that make them very dangerous and difficult to effectively deal with in a court case. So imagine standing in a courtroom facing a witness who doesn't fit that typical profile of arrogance and overt manipulation that most narcissists have. Instead, this person appears soft-spoken, woe is me, wounded, I'm a victim. That's kind of how they come across. But beneath that facade lies a masterful manipulator, someone that is skilled in twisting narratives and evoking undue sympathy. The key is it's undue sympathy. It's all manipulation. Covert narcissists operate in the shadows, making them some of the most dangerous witnesses you can encounter. Now, you can encounter these people in civil cases like divorces, injury cases, and commonly in criminal cases. So over the past 24 years, I've tried hundreds of cases and dedicated countless hours to mastering the art of cross-examination. I'm a cross-examination geek. I just love this stuff. I've written 3 books with my law partner and wife on cross-examination techniques. I've also written several books on trial skills and strategy. You can check them out on Amazon.com. My journey into cross-examination has involved collaborating with many top-tier forensic psychologists so that I can understand the intricacies of personality disorders, particularly narcissistic personality disorder. My experience has equipped me with unique insights into how to effectively question witnesses that are narcissists and how to expose them without falling into pitfalls and damaging my own credibility. Today, I'm going to give you some strategies that I've developed to maintain control, to expose inconsistencies, and to damage the credibility of a covert narcissist that is testifying against your client on cross-examination. The first step is recognizing covert narcissistic witnesses. You should know this coming into the case. You should have read the file. You should know the facts. You should know a lot about the people you're going to be cross-examining. You should know whether or not this person has some of the characteristics of a covert narcissist. You have to be aware of what type of characteristics these people have because they are not like the typical narcissist that you see in the movies that are like grandiose, bragging all the time, very loudmouth. Covert narcissists are silent puppeteers. They have the same sense of entitlement. They have the same lack of empathy, but they're manipulators that are more skilled than the overt narcissist. Covert narcissists often present themselves as the victim. Poor me. I'm a victim my whole life. Look at me. Feel bad for me. They exude an air of fragility that can easily manipulate the emotions of the jury and the judge. I've seen it done many times. For example, I once had a case where the witness constantly downplayed their own importance. Even though it was the witness who was testifying against her husband in a serious case, and she accused them of all these things, which turned out mainly to be false or exaggerated. And she kept saying things like, oh, I'm not sure anyone cares about my side of the story, or yeah, no one ever believes me. I'm just a woman, or yeah, I'm probably just overreacting. And then she would go on to explain something that is clearly very serious and no one would ever think she was overreacting. So at first glance, these statements seem innocuous and the typical person buys them, but they're strategic. This person is fishing for reassurance and sympathy, and that's how they go through life, by manipulating and using people. Remember, these are narcissists. These are just a different subcategory of your typical narcissist, but they're no less conniving and manipulative and dangerous. These folks often position themselves as the underdog, so always be on the lookout. Is the person always being the underdog? Are they always trying to get sympathy? They can't give a straight story without trying to make people feel pity for them. You probably know people like this in your daily life. Now, this is dangerous because in a criminal trial or a divorce case, for example, it creates a biased emotional environment. Often they're going to believe the person because why would this person cry? A lot of jurors think, man, she's got a lot of details. She's very emotional. Yes, the person is very emotional, and it's all acting. So the jury may start to view them as the poor victim, the little guy, and you as the lawyer or your client as the big bad bully. And this can cloud their judgment when evaluating the facts because court cases are about facts and evidence, not about emotion. Emotional decisions are bad decisions. And that's why you need to shut this type of covert narcissist down before they can manipulate the jury with emotion. First thing is, you must establish control through precise questions. On cross-examination, your question should be one new fact, just one new fact per question, always leading. Make sure you don't have multiple facts in your questions. Make sure you don't have a bunch of adjectives or adverbs or just things that can be disputed. For example, instead of saying, "You had a lot to drink that night, didn't you?" I mean, what does that even mean? The person can quibble and try to weasel their way out of that. Even if they had 30 drinks, they could try to say, "Well, I wouldn't say it was a lot." You have to be very precise. Lock them down on everything that they did with facts, not generalizations. Control is paramount when cross-examining any witness. But with covert narcissists, it's a delicate balance. Because they thrive in ambiguity, they will use open-ended opportunities to steer the narrative back to their victimhood. For example, if you're questioning a witness about the timeline of events, instead of asking something vague like, "What did you do after leaving the office?" and they could go on to elaborate on how bad the situation was and how they're the victim, don't do that. You should ask specific questions like, "You left the office at 6 p.m. That's when you punched out. You then got into the car at around 6:05. The car was parked in the parking lot. It was right outside of the office. You arrived at the cafe at 6:15, correct?" And when you're asking these specific questions, the covert narcissist is going to be getting very anxious and nervous because they're not used to someone actually questioning them with specificity. They're used to controlling the narrative through emotion. And if they sidestep your questions that are fact-driven, that are very specific, and you have evidence that can show, for example, when they left, when they punched out, what time they arrived at the cafe. You have receipts and things like that. Pin them down. Don't take the bait and let them give that narrative. Steer them back to the question. Again, repeating the one new fact that you're asking per question. Slow it down and pin them down and make them answer. If they don't answer, repeat the question, and then move to impeach them. For example, if you have a GPS from their vehicle that shows them arriving at the cafe at 6:15, lay it on them. But you want to let them make their own bed by not answering, by being evasive. That whole acting victim facade that they're putting on, the false victim facade, it can only last so long. They cannot keep it up. After you're about 10, 15 minutes into it, they become very nasty and aggressive and their true character starts coming out. The victim thing doesn't work. You'll see flashes of it, maybe an hour into the cross when they're really getting pinned down. They might start crying or ask for a break or start hyperventilating, something like that. Again, they're trying to buy time. So anchor your questions in indisputable facts. It limits their ability to manipulate the narrative and keep the focus on the facts and the evidence, not on their acting. Next, you have to highlight the inconsistencies and self-contradictions. Covert narcissists often weave complex stories with a lot of emotion and exaggerations, and they very often have many contradictions. They might not even realize that their narrative doesn't add up and it's filled with contradictions because they've often told so many stories to so many different people with so many generalized exaggerations that they can't keep track of them. But their main purpose is staying invested in their own self-image as the victim. You have to understand that. They must be perceived as the victim because if you start exposing them as a liar, a manipulator, a bad person, someone who's not credible, someone who hurts their kids, someone who makes false allegations, that is attacking the core of their ego, which is crucial to a narcissist. They have very fragile egos. That's why they have to act so bombastic and so over the top and entitled. When they get confronted with the facts, they can't handle it. And this is when you'll see this witness crash and burn in self-destruct on the stand. For example, in a case where they're saying, "I was too intimidated to confront the accused or the client. I'm not that type of person. I'm a very passive person. I just kind of let things go. I want to maintain peace in the office. He just kept harassing and saying things to me sexually. I was so scared, so intimidated," and so forth. So let's say you have messages between these two. You can pin them down and say, "Yeah, you've testified that you avoided communication with my client due to fear. You were intimidated by him. You were afraid to express yourself around him. You didn't think anyone would believe you, and that's why you never said anything to him or confronted him. Isn't that correct?" And you build it up. I call this the build them up, knock them down technique. You want them to go all in on what they're saying and build it up as high as you can with as much exaggerated stuff as you can. Then you start cracking them down at the base of this tower of deception. What happens is by presenting them with evidence of contradictions, it allows the jury to see the discrepancies oh, I'm this poor person, I couldn't say anything, I didn't want to say anything. And then the truth. You're a lying, manipulative, vindictive, evil person who's threatening to destroy the lives of this guy and his family. So the other thing you need to do is use the victim narrative against them. The victim narrative is a powerful tool for a covert narcissist, but it can be double-edged. You have to come into this well prepared. You have to know all the inconsistencies. You have to know as much as possible. And if their actions don't align with how a typical victim might act, then you can use these inconsistencies to attack their credibility. I'll give you an example. And before I say this, I know that there's something called counterintuitive victim behavior. I think it's junk science. I will concede this. Not all victims act the same. Not all people are the same. Everybody reacts differently. Got it. But that does not mean that because a person does something that makes no sense, that's completely inconsistent with what they're saying and what a typical victim would do, then that means they're more truthful. And that's where the counterintuitive victim behavior gets flipped by some sketchy forensic psychologists. They try to say that everything that a victim does is a sign they're a victim, including lying, making up stories, exaggerating, threatening people. And you got to use those against the person. And I'll give you an example. So let's say there's a witness in this office setting. It's a sexual harassment case with some touching and some verbal alleged harassment. In reality, the two coworkers were having an affair. The guy wouldn't leave his wife, so the covert narcissist wants to destroy him and ruin him. And she accused him of sexual harassment in the workplace. He ended up getting accused of it in a civil trial. So now here we are in trial. This victim, you want to build this narcissist up. Get them admitting that they were too scared, no one would believe them. They are not the type that would be filing complaints. They would never want to hurt this man's life. It took everything in them to make the statement that they didn't want to make. People had to make them come forward and tell their story of victimhood and so forth. Basically build them up to be the type of person that I'm this passive, naive person who doesn't want to rock the boat. That's why I never reported all this stuff that happened. Let's say you have evidence that this person has been in the job for 1 year. They filed 7 complaints against 7 different coworkers. They accused their main supervisor, who was a woman, of abusive language and bullying. They accused the assistant manager of a bunch of misconduct. They've even threatened to go to the media and expose the company for unsafe work practices, bullying, and all this other stuff. Basically, what you would do is build the person up to get them to say, like, I'm not the type of person who would come forward. I wouldn't do that. And then you hit them with all the complaints they've made and show to the jury that this person has no problem making allegations, whether they're true, false, or for vindictive reasons. They are the least passive person. This person has filed a complaint every other month since they've been at this company. They would have no problem accusing a peer that they're friends with if the friend was doing all this bad behavior. So basically what you do is expose the gaps in their stories and make them look like they're an exaggerator, straight up liar, and also lets the jury decide on their own, hey, is this person's story adding up? So the next thing you need to do is you have to really protect your tone as the lawyer. Whether you're a man, a woman, whether you're loud-spoken, soft-spoken, you have to come into these cases very professionally. You have to tone it down with a covert narcissist. They want you to come in hot, aggressive, and lay into them, because then that feeds into their narrative, into their story that, oh, here we go again. I'm just over here telling the truth, and this big bad bully lawyer is yelling at me and being mean to me. I see so many lawyers screw this up where they come in hot on these witnesses, and it's hard to not, because they're annoying when they're sitting there lying to your face and manipulating you, and you know it. You know they're exaggerating to the judge and jury. It is difficult to sit there and watch someone lie through their teeth to try to hurt someone. But you must be calm, you must go slow, and you must be very, very disciplined. The way to take out this witness and destroy their credibility is slow, methodical, and speaking very calmly, softly, acting sympathetic. So whenever the person starts crying and says, I don't understand why you're attacking me like this. It's your client that did everything, that did this stuff to me. It's he that was harassing me. Instead of saying, no, ma'am, and laying into them, you say, I'm sorry that you feel that way. I understand these questions are difficult, but my goal is to ensure that we get all the facts out to the jury. So let's go back to my question, okay? In reality, you're not sorry. You're going to drag this out as much as necessary to degrade their credibility down to not believable, and then finish your cross-examination. Don't just skip ahead because the person's crying and it's uncomfortable. Too many lawyers do that, where they just move on because the person's crying. If it's a covert narcissist, they lack empathy, they're very manipulative, they're crying on purpose. The crying is generally fake and they can't keep it up. So the bottom line is, if you're cross-examining a covert narcissist, it's going to be challenging. But if you use these strategies and you understand who you're dealing with, you can minimize and control this person quite easily. If you don't know what you're doing, you just rush in super aggressive, you're walking into an ambush. But if you know the signs, you know what a narcissist is and what a covert narcissist is, then you can come in with the mindset to expose and destroy the credibility of this witness and put your client in the best position possible.